What I'll cover is enterprise mobility. A little bit about me. Over the course of last several years, I've always sort of tried to lead innovation and entry into new markets. I've done that with Citrix for a couple of times, including desktop virtualization, which is rapidly growing market now for Citrix. Over the course of past 18 months, I've been leading Citrix's from Citrix's perspective, what are we going to do in enterprise mobility? And I'm going to cover that a little bit, but what I'll talk a little bit about is how I've structured this talk is whatever I've learned over the course of last 18 months as to what I see is happening in mobile for the enterprise, how it relates to what Citrix is doing, and as well as, since this is SRII, what does it mean from services perspective? Where I see sort of the adoption taking place, and in my assessment, my conversations with services industry, how is sort of services industry getting prepared for it? So I'm going to do that by making 3 predictions. Now, these are not going to be like, maybe you'll agree with them, maybe you don't. This is just my predictions based on what I see is happening. And I think that I'm going to start with making a prediction. I know we're sort of seeing tremendous this growth in cloud, big data. Undoubtedly huge sort of growth there. But when it comes to enterprise computing, we all know that cloud adoption is taking place at a certain rate, and you're going from this private to public cloud with sort of hybrid in the middle. I think that my first prediction is that mobility will be the biggest change in the enterprise over the course of next 12 to 18 months. It's quite simple. Now, if you look at what's happening today, there was a recent survey that was conducted. It's hard to read from the back, I know that, so I'll read this to you. This was a survey conducted for what enterprises are doing on mobile management over the course of next 12 months. What this suggests, this reads is there's no plans to replace their existing environment, which is all based on BES, BlackBerry Enterprise Server. And the next two charts are likely to replace BES in next 6 months and likely to replace it in next 6 to 12 months. The blue and the green represent the survey results from Q1 of this year and Q2 of this year. Okay? So if you notice the green charts, combine the second and the third bars, they add up to more than 50%. More than 50% of enterprises are saying they're going to replace their existing mobile management over the course of next 6 to 12 months. That is massive. There is no such change that's happened or is happening in the enterprise for any technology. That's a big change. It's a massive change that's taking place. And I think it's brought up some big changes. Think about it. At this point in time, we just concluded some of this data analysis ourselves. On average, if you ask enterprises, 3 devices are being used by a user on a daily basis, on average. That's massive per employee. That wasn't the case 2 to 3 years ago, right? Used to be certain employees had BlackBerries and then their computer, and then maybe they had some sort of remote access. But on an average daily basis, 3 devices on average per employee. That's huge. Locations, 50% of employees work in multiple locations on a daily basis. Massive. 200 plus apps, which is an average customer portfolio that we see customers have, that's massive. And then unmanaged data, 80+% of Fortune 100 companies are dealing with use of unmanaged data clouds to store data. This is big changes, and all of this is brought, if you think about it, is the capabilities now that we have in our pockets and in our tablets. Because that's what makes all of this proliferation of apps and documents and data just a massive problem. And it's the top priority. You look at sort of any of the typical top CIO priorities curve. I think this one's from Gartner. It's number 2 priority here, just because there's a massive sort of shift and change that's occurring. And you're sort of going from this mode of managing email to managing all forms of apps and data. So that's my first prediction. A big change is happening on mobile. My second prediction is, used to be or it still is in many enterprises, that we are going to have a standard function for device, a standard for network, a standard for apps. I think that mode is getting over. My second prediction is heterogeneity is here to stay. This is not a wave that soon IT will have to discover how they're going to, eventually standardize on different devices. That thing is over. This heterogeneity is here to stay, and I'm not the only one talking about it. And the reasons are pretty straightforward. I think it starts with people. It starts with people. I mean, it's a fundamental shift of how the new workforce coming in, and that's sort of bringing in a different expectations on computing, is changing just the whole thinking behind this standard compute. I mean, I think in every enterprise at this point in time, more and more new workforce coming in. I think by 2015, it's estimated that the new workforce, which is below 30 years old at that time, will be majority of the workforces in the US and enterprise. That's massive. And this workforce is brought up with computing expectations that's very different. They brought their own computers to schools, colleges, and expect to do so when they come to work. The same workforce is just used to having a much different expectations from computing. Computing also means where they work from, right? And then and where and how they mix work and play. We all know that for anyone who deals with teenagers, the difference between studying and and playing, as we would sometimes call it, instant messaging, to just collaborating with all kinds of social media, is just mixed in. And that's just a work behavior that's coming into the work as well. You can't change it. That's just how the sort of workforce is coming in. And we all know, we all go to some kind of a computer store these days, and you see this choice that's available. You come to work and you get a big black brick. And that sort of difference is become such stark in the choice you get on the consumer world versus you come at work and you don't get. And that's just sort of changing. Now, that's on the device end. Just this heterogeneity is here to stay, more and more adoption of different types of devices. And it's going to start from mobile. It's going to start from mobile because that's where heterogeneity comes in much larger. And it's new paradigm because it's moving and shifting from something that's no longer going to be there in the enterprise in a big way, which is standardization on BlackBerry. It's shifting, so that's how it starts. But then it doesn't have to end there. It's going to go throughout. The second part on heterogeneity is apps. I think if you look at application portfolio today, we all talk about how beautifully new apps can be built regarding using all this cloud data and analytics and platforms and all that stuff. Unfortunately, in enterprise IT, nothing goes away. It's all additive. We build new apps with new infrastructure and platforms. The old ones don't go away. They stay there. And as a result, this sort of heterogeneity continues to increase. This is a response we got. At the end of 2013, what do customers expect their app portfolio to look like? The difference, by the way, in 2012 data and 2013 data is slight shift towards mobile and SaaS. The rest of it looks identical. So it's already there. It's only getting worse. Things are not going away. New things are getting added. That's a pretty complex problem, right? So heterogeneity is here to stay. It's there on apps, and it's coming on devices. It's a pretty difficult problem because if you think about, if you've sort of thought about service offerings, to enterprises, how do you do a contained service offering? You do a contained service offering today by creating a standard. By creating a standard on devices, by creating a standard on portfolio, which is desktop typically, and then you say that any changes that enterprises make, you're going to charge enterprise for that. That's how most sort of service offerings end up working in some shape or form, and I'm generalizing it. In this environment, when there's just heterogeneity on devices and heterogeneity on the apps, there's a fundamental shift that has to occur, in how you serve it. That's pretty radical, I think. Third, this shift. I think this mobile will drive a big shift in how enterprises think of not just mobile, but the entire end-user computing. Now, this may be a little bit out. It'll start with mobile, but it's going to carry forward into, in general, broad end-user computing. So what does that mean? We asked a question from the enterprises today. I think I could have shown you what do they do today. Everyone manages devices today. It's very simple. That's how we've been trained. From any practitioner, how they get trained, manage devices, lock them down, control them, secure them, full life cycle of devices. But when you ask in the context of mobile, okay, how enterprises would like to manage their environment, this was the result we got. Today, this is what their preference is. You compare it with what they do with PCs, laptops, it's completely, different. It's 180 degrees different. In mobile, everyone is thinking of doing something different because it's a new start. That's massively different than how any of the managed services were built for when the sort of PCs, laptop era. This is a big shift. And what we are doing is, from Citrix's perspective, we sort of entered into this whole virtualization market. And the whole virtualization market really was to be absolutely candid, this whole mobile revolution, and in particular, the emergence of iPad was a godsend for the desktop virtualization space. We didn't predict that, right, when we entered this space. We talked about, just enablement of enabling users to be able to work from anywhere. Why? Because you virtualize their apps and desktops and enable them to have any device, any location. So sort of a very simple story. Well, at that point in time, when we came up with this, there was no tablet. When we came up with tablet, it was just obvious that, for enterprises, that there was no way to provide access to their existing apps to these mobile devices besides virtualization. So hence, very rapid adoption. And at this point in time, if you look at desktop virtualization, it's at a rapid growth. It's still predicted to grow at over 40% for the next 3 years. It's already a massive it's the biggest business for Citrix. And if you see what's the number one driver, it's the heterogeneity in devices and mobile. Okay? But I talked about how application portfolio is also going to be heterogeneous. That's a good starting point. Virtualize the apps you've got, but that can't be the ending point. They're building new apps, it's getting heterogeneous, and it's getting all these different types of apps. There are certain apps that can be virtualized. By definition, a virtualized app that runs in the data center is secure because it's running in the data center. But there are going to be apps that are going to be running local just because of the form factor, the availability, the user experience, the accessibility. All of those factors will drive heterogeneity in apps. So what we have done is we've extended our service delivery metaphor from virtual apps to all apps. The way we do it is through one single universal client called Citrix Receiver. It's a mobile client available for every platform and every browser you can imagine. So it's iPads, iPhone, Android, Metro when it comes with Microsoft Windows 8, of course PC, Mac, and all sorts of HTML5 based browsers. You open this receiver, and for a user, they get to see the apps that have been given to them. These apps can be virtual apps that are running in the data center, could be web-based apps, could be cloud-based web apps, or internal web apps, all running and leveraging local browsing, or could be native apps that have been developed by the enterprise or a third-party ISV that can all be securely delivered using this system. And to make it secure, what we have done is we have adopted the concept of a secure mobile container that keeps all the data for all of these apps only among these apps. So if you have any of your personal apps on the devices, any of the personal data, your corporate work data never goes outside of the corporate work boundaries, and your personal data only through policies can come into your work boundary. So we've created that sort of framework and giving IT one central place to control all different apps to users who just go download their Citrix receiver in a cloud-like fashion, enter their email address, or any other security authentication that IT may have enabled. They connect to their store that IT has published, and they get all of their apps as services. So that's how it works. Citrix Receiver, available for all of these different platforms, connecting into one storefront that IT sort of puts forward, which connects into what we call content controllers, which could be our virtual apps, which is our Zen products, web apps, that could be internal web apps without requiring any kind of a special VPN, what we call a micro VPN capability built in so that securely traverses the required firewalls. SaaS apps, native mobile apps, which could be running locally on the device, and connecting to our full cloud-based, both private or public cloud, data sync and sharing service, where you can have all your documents stored and interoperate with all of your apps. So that's how we have built, and again, gateway services enabling both authentication, access, as well as controls that IT needs. Now, what we believe is this sort of becomes, and we're not the only one. Citrix is not going to be the only one offering solutions like this. There'll be others. But fundamental shift in service offering from more device-centric to apps and document-centric is here. And this kind of a solution, whether it's from Citrix or anyone else, will fundamentally shift, in our opinion, how customers do delivery of their services, their apps and docs, which is what they want to manage. I believe they're going to start with mobile first, but these solutions will take them automatically towards a breadth of devices that eventually are going to have to exist in the enterprise. I'm going to talk through this again really quickly. This is how it works. I think you sort of got it. It's got content controllers, an enterprise app store, gateway services that let you configure policies and security, enabling secure access, and then a mobile container which stays on the device that securely protects all the data, not mixing it with any of the personal apps and documents. We believe this will fundamentally change how markets are building. I think there was a recent report that Yankee Group said that this new enterprise mobility management market is emerging, which is essentially very similar to the solution that I just walked through, enabling IT to manage their apps and documents as a service rather than going out and managing devices. Very interesting sort of shift occurring. This may not have to be limited to MDM, which is mobile device management. It could go out into even PC-based system management. A fundamental shift towards more of a service management, which is apps and documents rather than device management. What does that mean? What does that mean for all of us, I think, especially for the service industry? I think we're at the starting point of this, to be candid. And if I were to sort of map out how this is going to grow, without sort of a specific on the time axis, I think a lot of it as to how quickly this scales, as we all know, depends upon, the availability of certain things and interest from the market. We believe there's strong interest from the market for mobile. And I think really we're at a point at this point where the more I talk to customers, the more I talk to, this sort of customers who have mobility and enterprise mobility as their top priorities, there's architects, CIOs, CTOs in enterprises who are at this point in time looking for guidance. They're looking for guidance as to what do they do, how do they proceed. But very, very quickly, we have seen some, typically sort of these early movers who have moved on to the next phase of looking at best practices. They've developed their architectural footprints, they've developed their architectural blueprints, and now they're looking at best practices, as well as this is where a huge sort of services opportunity comes in, because at the end of the day, we all know IT at this point in time is encumbered with just supporting what they've got. They can barely do that. This mobile revolution that's coming in used to be that a simple mobile operations person sitting with a BlackBerry Enterprise server was able to manage email accounts. Now with this diversity of apps and diversity of devices, they're looking for huge services help. And we are seeing more and more sort of industry on services and just shifting and creating new and new services. I think many service providers at this point in time are entering the market. And then, at some point in time, they're going to be looking for compatibility. But at this point in time, majority of our conversations are around guidance, best practices to help the customers, know what they should do and how they should do it. So, I know I was the last speaker, went through fast. This is my last slide. So I'm going to really quickly summarize. And I don't know, Chris, if you have time for a couple of questions. So in essence, number one, I think next 12 to 18 months, mobile is going to be a big change. Big change that's going to happen in the enterprise. Two, it's going to drive more heterogeneity. And three, I think that change in mobile is going to drive change in end-user computing, starting with mobile first. Chris?
Thank you, Sumit.